I mean, it's a very humbling and humanizing experience to be a float guide. The river really has a tremendous capacity to carry off people's sorrow. I mean, it's a physical thing, and especially when you're standing in it, I think the rhythm of fishing and the rhythm of the rowing and the rhythm of the water itself just kind of loosens something up in people, and just really had some great days out there, some of the best days of my life.
Welcome to the Destination Angler Podcast, the podcast for anglers who travel. And I'm your host, Steve Haig. We go right to the source, the local guides and experts, to build your knowledge of top fishing locations around North America. It's a big world out there. Now go and fish it.
I'm going away for a while, but I'll be back soon. Whoa, whoa.
Hey anglers, welcome back to another episode of the Destination Angler, brought to you by J.P. Ross Fly Rods, makers of happiness, one rod at a time. Get outside and simply fish. And Harvest Hosts, offering exceptional RV camping at 2,500 breweries, wineries, and farms and more nationwide. And by Trout Routes, the ultimate stream mapping app. Now you can navigate like a pro over 13,000 trout streams across the country. Coming up on the Destination Angler, you won't want to miss the Lower Sacramento River for trophy stripers with Hogan Brown, VP of Marketing, Loon Outdoors. Then we're headed back to Colorado to take a tour of the famous South Platte River. Later on, we'll be tackling a very important topic for our time with a show dedicated to climate change with two experts from Trout Unlimited who debunk fact versus fiction. Be sure to backcast to catch the last episode of the Destination Angler, my fishing spree through central Pennsylvania, where I was able to catch up with some experts like George Costa of TCO Fly Shops, Neil Sunday of Relentless Fly Fishing, and Jonas Price of the Feathered Hook. Hey, if you like the show, be sure to subscribe to catch all the new Destination Angler podcasts and tag a buddy. Today, our destination are the gold medal waters of the Arkansas River in beautiful Colorado. And our guest is expert fly angler and guide Greg Felt, owner of ArkAnglers Fly Shop with stores in Salida and Buena Vista, Colorado. The Arkansas River is the fan favorite destination, as ranked by Colorado anglers year after year, and for good reason. Spectacular scenery, 100 miles of public access, supreme pocket water, and diverse hatches keep anglers on their toes plying this freestone stream for wild trout. And if you like variety, the tributaries and alpine lakes in the area are outstanding. Having just spent a week out here myself, I can vouch for Greg when he tells us these fish aren't all that picky, that presentation and drift are much more important than fly selection. A little bit about Greg: for over 30 years, he has called the Arkansas River Valley his home. As a fly fishing guide, fly shop owner, and Chaffee County Commissioner, Greg is deep on technical knowledge and is super involved in water issues in the state. He was even appointed by the governor to serve on the Colorado Water Conservation Board. In addition, he's the director of the Upper Arkansas and Southeastern Colorado Water Conservation Districts. He has served on the state's Outfitter Licensing Board, the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area Citizens Task Force, and the Colorado Advisory Board Trust for Public Land. Whew, that's a lot. I was super impressed with Greg's leadership abilities and how he navigates the many voices involved in conservation in the state. So let's listen in as this fly shop owner turned public servant explains the ins and outs of successful angling on Colorado's favorite fishery. So Greg, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man. So, hey, you are a busy guy. Like, how do you find time to fish?
It's unfortunately, it's quite a ways down the priority list right now with a lot of the other things I'm dealing with, but I do get a lot of vicarious pleasure from just being an outfitter and communicating with my guides every day and hearing from our clientele.
That's cool. Now, you were telling me you have been out the last couple of weekends though, and how have you done?
We've done great. You know, I've got this little routine of going out at like 6:30 in the morning on Sunday mornings when even a lot of the hardcore fishermen just aren't quite up at Adam yet, and floating in the Arkansas and the Salida area. And it's just a time of day this time of year when you can throw a single big dry and kind of get a lot of the biggest fish are in the most obvious spots.
Oh man.
And they're the lower light, they're feeling more confident, and it's just a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah, because this time of year is kind of the season of fish coming up and kind of sniffing around your fly and bumping it a little bit, right? But you're finding some fish that are still pretty ready to take a fly, huh?
Oh, sure. I mean, this river does get a lot of attention. And of course, the bigger fish are older fish. They've lived through a lot more. They're just have a better, they're just a little more cagey. And, but getting out real early in the morning, sort of being the first person out there, they're often kind of more focused on feeding than on their vulnerabilities. And it's just a beautiful time to be out too. Nobody's there and it's cool and just really enjoy that.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Now you guys have gotten Colorado has gotten quite a bit of rain this summer, but the Colorado River, which is sort of up and over the pass from you, the Colorado River is still in some dire shape right now, isn't it?
It's unbelievably rough. Since the Colorado River Compact was written in 1922, this is the worst conditions we've seen in that basin. And it's important to remember that even on the eastern side of the divide, so the Arkansas River and the South Platte River drainages and the Rio Grande to the south, that these drainages import water from the west slope, from the Colorado River through tunnels and ditches as well. So what happens on the Colorado really affects the entire state. We're all dependent on that.
Yeah. Yeah. What kind of shape is the Arkansas in? I was out there just a couple of weeks ago and you guys had a ton of water out there, it seemed like, for the Arkansas.
It was amazing because this last winter was the third out of four we've had the snowpack was really lousy. And the second in a row. 2019 was pretty good, but 20 and 21 were very dry. In 20, we didn't get any rain in the summer, and so we had very low flows and a lot of concern about fire and difficult to irrigate, all those things. This year, lousy snowpack, but we really got some good, what we call monsoon rains that came up from the southwest. And those rains really helped sustain the flow. And so we are headed into the fall with a pretty good base flow. And so I think it's going to be great. And it's worked out very well for us in terms of our fishing season.
Yeah, that's a huge praise right there. Love hearing that. So let me ask you, the Arkansas, as I said in my intro, has been rated number one in angler satisfaction surveys that the state does, over and over and over again. It's kind of the fan favorite stream in Colorado. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I think, and so what this question speaks to is sort of, if you could be anywhere today, where would you like to be? Right. And it's the Arkansas River comes out on top in sort of the popular imagination. I think a lot of people have had great experiences down here over the years. We've got a great wild brown trout fishery. We got some big rainbows in the mix. We have an incredibly diverse aquatic entomology. We're not a tailwater, we're a freestone river. And so it's really rich biota. And then we have a tremendous amount of public access. Basically, if you look at all the access and stretch it out, it would be the equivalent of basically one side of the river being public for the whole 102 miles of the gold medal water. So there's a lot here, and then there's a lot of ability to access it as well.
Yeah, that's a great formula, right? And boy, we live that out there. It just really is kind of endless. We were out there for a week. You could never come close to fishing all of that in a week. It's just like, we're, we're like a kid in a candy store. Where do we want to fish today? It's fantastic.
Yeah. Hard choices.
Right. You really can't make a bad one though, and you've got some fantastic opportunities with some of the tributaries that flow into the Ark, some of the alpine lakes around there and some of the other rivers in the area. Can you talk about maybe the broader area and the fishing opportunities?
You bet. So what we call the Upper Arkansas River Basin, so above Pueblo Reservoir, upstream to the headwaters, is managed by Parks and Wildlife as the Arkansas Headwaters Recreation Area. So you've got this incredible stretch of river that's really managed with recreation, fishery, and environment in mind. And then you've got the valley floor up here, a lot of which is private land. And then as you start to go up the slope on either side of the valley, you are quickly transitioned into Bureau of Land Management and then Forest Service land. And up in the San Isabel National Forest here, which goes up to the Continental Divide, a lot of 14,000 foot peaks along there, we've got just an unbelievable array of alpine lakes. And then those lakes and the snowfields up high feed, just myriad tributaries that coalesce into several good-sized tributaries, such as Clear Creek, Chalk Creek, Cottonwood Creek, the South Arkansas River. And so you've got the main stem, big tributaries, small tributaries, and alpine lakes just give you an incredible array of opportunities throughout the season. And then just based on where we are kind of in the center of the state, you can hop over the divide to the south into the Rio Grande Basin. You can go west and you're into the Gunnison or the the Roaring Fork. You can go a little further north and get into the Frying Pan, or over to the Eagle, the Blue, and then to the east of us, sort of northeast of us, is the South Platte. So this valley and our two main communities, Salida and Buena Vista, are just a great sort of launch point. There's, like you said, you could spend all summer just in this valley. But if you're interested in kind of circulating and hitting some of these really iconic rivers in Colorado, they're all just over the hill from the Arkansas.
Yeah, amazing. What a playground.
Hi, everybody. This is JP from JP Ross Fly Rods. We're happy to support Steve and sponsor the Destination Angler podcast. Do us a favor and check us out on our website, smallstreamflyfishing.com. JP Ross Fly Rods and Company has been around since 1997. We've made thousands of fly rods with one purpose: helping you get outside and be happy. So check out our line of small stream fly rods like our Muir 7-foot 5-piece 3-weight E-glass, our famous Beaver Meadow series of rods starting at 5-foot 2-weight, and don't forget our 6.5-foot 3-weight 4-piece, and now our new Beaver Meadow S-glass 6.5, 2-weight, 3-weight, all the way up to 8-foot 5-weight, all in 4-piece. Check us out, please, at smallstreamflyfishing.com. And thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you on the water.
So can you break down for us the Arkansas? So maybe, start wherever you want. What are the major sections, and kind of how does the character of the water change through those different sections, and maybe even, if you have different ratios of browns and rainbows in those different sections, what's all that look like?
Sure. So we'll just go top to bottom here. The upper end, so just south of Leadville, up in Lake County, is where the Arkansas River really sort of becomes a river. There are several tributaries that all intersect right in that Leadville area. And so that upper end of the river flows through kind of a high meadow valley. It's got a gentle gradient, real cobbled bottom, and a lot of cut banks, and just incredible views. I mean, you're looking across grassy meadows up at 14,000 foot peaks, and it's a small volume of water. It's basically above where any of the additional flows come out of a couple big reservoirs that are on tributaries.
Okay.
As you move downstream from Hayden Meadows, the river, the way the geology works, the river intersects a steep and fairly narrow gorge. We call it the Granite Gorge. And in that reach, you have both Twin Lakes and Clear Creek Reservoir that are contributing variable amounts of water, stored water, into the flow. And so at Granite, kind of the upper end of that is where you start to see some people actually boating the river, although it's pretty dang demanding white water up there. So the Granite Gorge is big granitic boulders, a lot of plunge pools, pretty turbulent, but really, really cool water to fish in the summertime. Just beautiful. And as you continue downstream, down to about Buena Vista, you're in kind of similar type terrain. It may not be as tight of a gorge, but it is big granitic boulders, a very diverse rock size along the bottom. So you have a lot of velocity shelters along the bottom of the river. It's not sort of sorted cobbles. It's just a real mix. And so it's real pocket water, fast, steep gradient, very oxygenated water. And it's a challenging place to be a fish because of all that. But there's a lot of food up there, and the fish just have to, develop a lifestyle that allows them to deal with that high current velocity. When you get below Buena Vista, you get about 5 miles, 6 miles of kind of gentle area. Again, it's sort of a mixture of running through pastures and then running through more of this boulder type country, but it is a gentler gradient. So along the river, that would be sort of Johnson Village down to Fisherman's Bridge and Ruby Mountain are access points. And then the river plunges into Browns Canyon, which if you're a geologist, this is a graben valley. There was sort of a dome effect and then fault blocks that dropped. And Browns Canyon's one of these fault blocks that dropped. Doesn't look exactly like that now because of erosion, but it's an amazingly beautiful granitic canyon that's now a national monument. Actually,
cool.
President Obama made it a monument. I can't remember the year, but during his second term, and not developed like a national monument, but it's protected. And that is you either need to hike into there or boat into there. There's no road access really.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that's just a spectacular place to fish, particularly around this time of year. Getting into September, early October, and in the spring. Not much boat traffic because the flows are low, but just amazing structure in there and some really nice fish. When you come out of Browns Canyon, you enter another segment of river that's gentle in terms of gradient and more sort of moving through alluvial kind of pasture country. So getting more into the cobble type riverbed. And so that's down through Stonebridge, Big Bend, down into the town of Salida. And then below Salida, you enter a series of canyons that are kind of interconnected, and we call the whole thing Bighorn Sheep Canyon. And it's about 45 miles long. Highway 50 runs along that stretch, so there's a lot of easy access. In some ways, that's the most valuable part of our fishery in a way, because it fishes well all year round. And where the upper sections get pretty icy and cold, and it's just tough being a fish up there in the winter. Down in Bighorn Sheep Canyon, get great midge hatches all winter long, and some really good nymphing. And so that's where you'd find us all year round. And that's where you tend to see a lot of the biggest fish are down there because they're able to really effectively feed all year round.
Ah, wow. We missed that. I want to go back. That sounds amazing. And below Pueblo Reservoir, that's a tailwater then, right?
That's right. And it's funny because once you get to the bottom of Bighorn Sheep Canyon at Parkdale, then you have the Royal Gorge, which is an unbelievably spectacular place, 1,000-foot deep gorge, just sheer walls. We don't fish in there, but there are fish, but it's tough getting in there, and the railroad goes through it. But below that, you hit Canyon City, and really the Arkansas River enters the high plains, and it's no longer a mountain river. But because of Pueblo Reservoir, you get a tailwater down in the city of Pueblo. And we go down there, sort of November, December, January, February. They've got a great trout fishery down there, more of a rainbow and cutbow type fishery. But
nice.
Because of the cold water coming out of the dam, that steady temperature, and that generates, really predictable hatches every day, like a typical kind of tailwater controlled environment. But it's a really fun place to fish in the winter because it's pretty warm down in Pueblo and low elevation. And so when we're talking about all this river that I just described, Leadville, that's 10,000 feet above sea level. Buena Vista is about 8,000, Salida is 7,000, Canyon's 5,500 or so. So, you've got this gradient. Obviously, the river's flowing downhill, and in the spring, when our spring hatches really get going and stuff, you're going to have warmer water down in Bighorn Sheep Canyon than you will upstream. And so we tend to slowly work our way upstream as we move through spring and into summer. And then great summer fishing up high. Water can get a little warm, especially lower Bighorn Chute Canyon in the heat of the summer. And then as we move into fall, we just kind of recede back downhill. So
Okay.
you have 100 plus miles of great fishery to work with. And we kind of have this tidal movement as anglers upstream and downstream, depending on time of year and temperature and
Sure.
amount of ice, that kind of thing.
So you may be shuttling people 30 miles upstream or 30 miles downstream, depending which fly shop they're coming out of in time of year.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. In the summer, we'll have trips going on up in Leadville, in Hayden Meadows at 9,500 feet. We'll have trips going on throughout everything I described, clear on down to Texas Creek, which is 35 miles below Salida. So, yeah, on a given day, our fleet of float guides and our crew of wade guides are spreading out literally over probably 80 miles of the Arkansas River.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so is this mostly a brown trout fishery?
It is. It's a wild brown trout fishery. The fish came with the railroad. They were brought in the 1880s, and they do well here. They're the two challenges that browns face on the Arkansas are the current velocity, right? Browns evolved in that European environment where you kind of slower, lazier rivers in large measure, and the Arkansas is a challenge for them. So they're always seeking that high current velocity.
Yeah.
And then the other challenge that we do have is we don't have a lot of vertebrate food in the Arkansas. We don't have a ton of minnows. We don't have a lot of crawdads or, kind of our biggest aquatic invertebrates would be golden stonefly nymphs. And so brown trout, to get to really become multiple pound fish, browns really need some meat. And the main thing they have are their own young in that regard. And so, we tend to see our bigger browns here are, 16 to 20 inches. And that's about as big as they get. Rainbows, on the other hand, you can grow a 30-pound rainbow on a diet of midges if you give them enough midges. And so if you ask me about, the 10 biggest fish I've dealt with on the Arkansas, probably 9 of them are rainbows, even though on average they only make up about 10, 15% of the fish population, depending on where you are.
Interesting.
So it's an interesting dynamic that way.
We definitely caught mostly browns, but an occasional rainbow. And we were up Clear Creek and caught some really deeply colored rainbows, but caught some rainbows that almost looked like steelhead. They're very silvery looking and really kind of match the color of the bottom of that river. I thought that was really interesting. Man, did they fight well.
Yeah.
Did really well.
So this river and our tributaries have such a variety of different rocks from different origins that you have. It's just the riverbed itself is incredibly beautiful. And when you look at the side of a brown trout and you kind of look beyond that back at the riverbed, they're a reflection of one another in terms of the spotting and the coloring and the modeling and everything. And but we really do see dramatic shifts in that coloration depending on kind of what environment the fish are living in. We had some flash flooding this summer out of a couple drainages just below Salida, and it pumped a bunch of sand into the river for a mile or two. And I was down there last weekend, and boy, when we were catching fish in that real sandy area, they looked a lot more like sand. And then as soon as you got back into that darker, more mottled river bottom, brown trout started looking like that. So really interesting how they adapt to their surroundings in terms of coloration.
Super interesting. Hey anglers, do you own an RV? Are you tired of staying at the same old parking lot every time you go on a trip? Yeah, you know the one I'm talking about, the poorly maintained lot where you have to navigate around abandoned shopping carts, potholes, and it's always overcrowded no matter what. Well, Harvest Hosts has a solution. Becoming a Harvest Host member grants you unlimited scenic overnight stays for just $99 a year, at over 2,500 locations nationwide, ranging from farms to breweries to museums and more. I mean, imagine relaxing at a gorgeous farm with fresh produce or a brewery with your favorite style of beer. And they offer a 90-day money-back guarantee, so there's nothing to lose. Harvest Host is so confident you love being a member that they are offering our listeners 15% off their membership for life with the code FISH. So head on over to harvesthost.com/join now and enter the code FISH for 15% off. Again, that's harvesthost.com/join-now and enter the code FISH. I'm curious, what advice do you have for, do-it-yourself wading anglers? We found that, you had to do some rock hopping along the shore. Sometimes you could kind of wade, but usually you were kind of climbing around on rocks. And I'm telling you, my second cast, when I got down to the Arkansas, I caught a 16-inch brown on a hopper, and we fished double hoppers all day long. We played around with some droppers, but it's like, we're doing well on top. So we just kept fishing hoppers all day long. But the wading was, if for younger guys, they're going to be all about it. But I don't know, what advice do you have for waders?
Well, so I talked about the variety of rock size. I talked about the current velocity. Many parts of the Arkansas River are tricky for wading. I definitely encourage people to have a wading staff and to just kind of be heads up when you're heading out into that current. I'd also suggest that oftentimes, not always, but often you don't gain a whole lot by wading way out on the Arkansas. There's places you do, but a lot of this is pretty rocky, pretty swift. And so thinking about, what we talked about current velocity being a real issue for brown trout, and basically the biggest inhibitor at this point to their growth is, trying to find ways to stay out of that current and continue to take in more calories than they expend. When you apply that to fishing, where are you going to find the slowest water? Well, along these rocky shorelines, there's all these great sort of ambush lies, pocket water. A lot of fish will park out there, or they're going to use the sort of obstructions and protuberances from the bottom formed by this great variety of rock size, right? It's not all sort of uniform cobbles sorted by the current. It's just a jumble down there. And so if you get in the heat of the day and the bright sun, a lot of times fish will move off those edges and they go to the bottom. And so you're often having to go to more of a subsurface rig, but you're trying to get down to where they are, hugging the riverbed just downstream of these obstructions that give them the same kind of current velocity that they get from rocks along the shoreline. So it really helps to think, the more you know about the fish, the more you can anticipate their behavior. But
yeah,
that's just a critical dynamic for them. And the fishermen that take that into account, I think, tend to do a lot better.
That's a great point. I don't think I mended one time fishing the Arkansas. I was fishing upstream in and around those boulders, and you didn't have to mend. I had a buddy who told me he was mending a lot. I'm like, well, what are you doing? He wasn't catching very many fish either. And finally we figured out, what he was doing. He was casting out into the middle more and trying to mend, and, so yeah, fish where the fish are, right?
Right. So that's it's like a desert out there in the middle.
Right.
Unless you've got a really strong hatch going and you've got some seam lines or some slack lanes out there downstream of rocks and stuff where fish can be near the surface out in the middle and hold their position. But what we tell people a lot of the time, particularly in the summer when we have more water in the river, is think of each bank like a small stream, from the shoreline out to that main seam line with the main current, and just focus on that. Don't worry about that big expanse of swifter moving water out there. It is kind of a desert unless you're getting down deep. Focus along that shoreline, and that's why you don't need to wade. You can kind of rock hop along and fish it like a small stream, kind of short casts, double hopper like you were talking about, really effective. And a lot of fish are there, and they're either actively feeding or they're in that kind of ambush mode where they're in an opportunistic stance and just ready to take advantage of whatever might happen to tumble in.
Yeah, I was really, really super, super pleasantly surprised how good it was. It just was like that all morning. We just had a great day. So being such a popular river and voted like kind of the fan favorite of Colorado, you'd think this river gets crowded, but it's really not the case, is it?
Nope. Again, we have so much public access. There is a lot of float fishing that goes on too, which really helps with, we have a lot of clientele who they're hitting that age where they're not as up for that kind of rock hopping mindset. And the boat really gives you great access to that rocky shoreline. It also, gives you access to fish through the private water. And so that's a very popular approach to the Arkansas River. But I think a lot of people who fish here also recognize that with a wild brown trout population like we have, and the kind of fishing that we've already described today, you need a fair bit of water. You need to cover water. You're not just going to set up at a nice hole and spend the day like you might on some tailwaters. You got to kind of keep moving, because your presence is going to affect these fish. And once they're aware of you, they're going to move off that edge and drop down a shelf or two along that shoreline and kind of button their lip. So we all know that, you don't just drop in right above somebody. You give people a lot of room on the Arkansas so that everybody has that opportunity to have plenty of good water.
Yeah, keep moving. Yeah, we saw no other anglers where we were fishing on the Arkansas, none. And we also fished some tributaries, no anglers at all. We had it all to ourselves.
Wow.
And these fish were eating like we were the only ones that had been there in a week or two or a month. I don't know. It was pretty darn good.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk about some of the other things to do in the area. So like, let's say you've got a group of people coming out for a fishing trip and they want to bring their spouses. What else could people do while they're out there?
Well, here, we've just spent a bunch of time talking about the Arkansas River from a fishing perspective. There's a whole nother paradigm or viewpoint that you can apply to this river, and that has to do with navigating and running whitewater. Not only is this the biggest stretch of gold medal water in the state and kind of the most popular fishery, but it's also the most popular whitewater in the state, and I believe in the country. Browns Canyon alone sees over 100,000 boaters a year, and the overall river from Granite down through the Royal Gorge sees something like close to 250,000 folks take a whitewater trip mainly during June, July, and August when the flows are up. It is world-class whitewater, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to see a place like Browns Canyon that's hard to get into just on foot. So anybody coming here with spouse, kids, that kind of thing, I'd be looking to build a whitewater trip in if it's the summertime. We've got, of course, great hikes to these high lakes. And for so many of us, you get up there, you catch some big cutthroats. It's a great fishing experience, but it also is just kind of time out of time. I mean, up in those alpine meadows that appear very much like they did 100 years ago, spectacular wildflowers, opportunity to see some great wildlife. It's just a true kind of that Colorado experience that people envision when they think about coming here. We've got quite a few of our Forest Service roads allow, ATVs and UTVs and motorcycles, all that kind of thing. So folks who are into the motorized recreation, there's plenty of opportunities for that. Salida and Buena Vista both have become real draws for mountain biking, particularly Salida, where we've got a very dry climate here. We're kind of in a rain shadow of the Continental Divide. So our trails are open. Many of our trails are open all year round, and really good biking here as well. There's horseback riding. And then both towns have a really great arts scene that has developed kind of over the last 20 years or so. So a lot of galleries and, kind of shopping, window shopping. And of course, good restaurants and watering holes and all that. So it really is a place you can come to fish, but also kind of have that destination experience. And there's plenty to do for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. And you've got some natural hot springs too there. We went to that Cottonwood hot springs at one point we were camping, so we needed a shower.
Yeah.
And that pretty much provided
it. Yeah.
So.
Cottonwood and the Mount Princeton hot springs, world-class hot springs resort. And then we have a great local ski area here too. If you were here in the winter or spring, Monarch Mountain, outstanding, 300 inches of powder snow a year. And
Oh, wow.
you can literally go up and ski in the morning, get in a dozen runs. The lift lines are short and the snow is great. And then as it's warming up in the winter, and most of our winter fishing happens kind of 11 to 3 o'clock during the warmest part of the day. You can ski in the morning and then come down and fish in Bighorn Sheep Canyon in the afternoon.
Sounds pretty good. And some of you folks may have heard of an organization called Young Life, and they've got two of their most popular camps out there, Trail West and Frontier, right along the valley.
That's right.
Yeah. I've taken my family to both those places. Fantastic. Hey, anglers, wanted to tell you about a new app called Trout Routes. Trout Routes helps you explore trout streams and locate new water so you can spend more time fishing and less time driving. These guys have mapped over 13,000 trout streams showing you public water, fishing easements, stream classifications, and even parking info, camping spots, boat ramps, and local fly shops. Let me tell you, Trout Routes was a real game changer for me in Colorado this summer when me and my buddies were looking for places to fish along the Arkansas River and its tributaries. They cover 16 states today, including Colorado, Montana, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wyoming, and more, and they're adding 7 new states soon. Hey, I would 100% recommend you download this app before your next fishing trip. And now listeners can get 10% off their annual subscription by using the code DESTINATION10. So head on over to your App Store, Google Play, or troutroutes.com and get signed up. You're going to love it. Shifting gears a little bit here, Greg, you were telling me when we first talked a couple of weeks ago that there are more water rights lawyers in Colorado than all other states combined. So,
That's
all right,
right.
so I got to ask you, why in the world did you get so involved in all this water stuff?
Sure. Well, I've built my whole life around the Arkansas River. And at some point, fairly early along, it just became clear to me, like, if I'm going to rely on this for my livelihood and my quality of life, I really need to understand it, one, and then two, try to do what I can to make sure that sort of its future is optimized. And so that led me down a path. I was very involved with the local Outfitters Association, and we had a couple of threats looming in terms of water rights, court cases that were going on, changes of use and things that could really impact the flows on the river. And so with my interest, the association kind of supported me working with a water attorney, and we got to work and made a lot of good moves to help protect the flows in the Arkansas River. Since that time, we really firmed up what we call the Voluntary Flow Management Program, which kind of is there to ensure or attempt to ensure that we have good flows for recreation in the summer through flow augmentation releases from Twin Lakes and Clear Creek reservoirs, if needed. And then we try to collaborate and coordinate to reduce flow in the spring, March, April, May, when the brown trout fry are emerging from their nests, and we have these great hatches of the blue-wing olives and the caddis and the crane flies in the spring. And fish really need to put on some weight for the runoff ahead, and these brown trout fry need to get established. So we worked really hard to work with the big municipal water interests, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Aurora, and try to find ways to achieve their needs and to deliver water for the extensive irrigated agriculture in the lower Arkansas River Valley, but also achieve as much non-consumptive beneficial use as we can from the way the water is managed between when it falls as snow and when it's delivered to its ultimate use. So this flow program and other efforts that we have been working on have allowed us to develop, both this incredible whitewater recreation economy here and the state's most popular fishery. And so working in that on those projects took me down, a lot of rabbit holes and a lot of research. And as I became more and more kind of knowledgeable about the water management the hydrology of this basin, you kind of start connecting a lot of dots and becoming better and better at finding sort of win-win solutions to our challenges. And that sort of has propelled me, I guess, onto more of the statewide stage now, representing this whole basin on the Colorado Water Conservation Board.
Yeah. Yeah. And the basin itself is what, 1 million people, tens of thousands of square miles?
Yeah, it's about 28,000 square miles. It's the biggest basin in the state, and it's the water in this river serves over 1 million people. Yeah. So there's a lot to think about and to sort of coordinate and compromise on and things, but it's really interesting work. It takes you got to do a lot of homework to kind of get that big picture here, but I really enjoy kind of just the intellectual challenge of how do we maximize the benefit from this water? Because as you're well aware, we've had a series of dry years. We kind of look at it as we've been in a drought for about 20 years now, with a few wet years sprinkled in, but overall declining supply, increasing demand, both on the Arkansas and over the hill on the Colorado. And it's really important that people who are interested and engaged in recreation and fisheries and the environment, that you can't just, bang the table and honk the horn. You got to really learn how it all works so that you're in a better position to understand the parameters within which these water managers are working, and then be able to sort of offer ideas that might actually be useful to them. Because I truly believe that everybody in the water world wants to achieve as much benefit as possible in their work. Sometimes they need a little help connecting some of the dots between what they're doing and what some of the other needs are. And so that needs to be our role in fisheries and recreation and the environment.
Okay. Yeah. Well, gosh, so appreciate you, Greg, because you care. My question, at the start was, why'd you get involved? I think it just comes down to the fact that you care and you're willing to do something about it. And like you said, do more than just, bang on the table, educate yourself a little bit, start connecting the dots. And when you say connecting the dots, a lot of that has to do with collaborating with people too, right?
Right. So another element that's really important, I've got some sort of rules that I've learned from my years on the river that are really applicable to trying to be an effective leader in the water world. And I'll just share those with you real quick here.
Please.
The first is, and this all comes from boating on the river, but the first is rig for a flip, right? We always tie all our gear in really well so that if you turn that boat over, you want to turn it back over and everything's still there. So in other words, you got to have your act together and have a good foundation in your life and in your knowledge. The second rule is focus on the pathways. I always tell people that rocks and obstacles and obstructions are actually totally irrelevant when you're boating on the river. But when you first start out, it's like that's all you see when you look downstream, are all the bad things. But they really don't matter. What matters is the pathways and where you're going to go. And whether you miss a rock by 10 feet or an inch, it doesn't really matter. If you didn't hit it, you didn't hit it. And so when you're thinking about trying to navigate the corridors of power in the water world, you really need to keep your mind and your vision focused on the way forward and not all the challenges and people who say no or that kind of thing, but really focus on how can we get to a better place. And then the third is make friends at the put in, right? And what that means is you have to build your relationships before you need them. You don't make friends in a crisis. You need to build those relationships, those rapports. You need to humanize the people playing these different roles long before the crisis hits, so that when things do get rough and they see your name on the incoming phone call, they're going to take your call because you're a person to them.
Right.
They know you, they understand you, and they trust you. And so rig for a flip, focus on the pathways, make friends at the put in. Those 3 rules, I think, serve us really well in how we approach trying to insert or embed ourselves into the water conversation in Colorado.
I love that. That is a fantastic leadership lesson, Greg. I love that. I wish you could put up a neon sign in Washington, D.C. with those 3 things.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't think at this point that the solutions to the challenges we face are going to come from Washington, D.C. It's going to come from this vast network of local communities scattered along rivers throughout the country. It's a grassroots effort, in other words, to try and get ourselves back on track and create the right expectations for our leadership.
I gotcha. Okay, so going back a few years, how did you come to, start a fly shop in Buena Vista and Salida? How did all that come about?
So I came here when I was 19. I grew up in Northern California, and I came here when I was 19. I got offered a job at a company that did whitewater rafting, kayaking, and fly fishing. And I thought, wow, let's go to Colorado. This would be great. All through college, every summer, worked on the river. In fact, I always said I was a boatman who went to college in the off season, and just loved that life. When I finished college, came back full time, and a few years of managing a rafting company taught me that I can do this myself. So in '92, this was before there'd been a fair bit of inflation in the cost of real estate out here. My wife and I bought an old motel. It was built out of logs. So the old motel, and we started a rafting company, just had 5 boats, and I was the only guy there that fished. And so I was a one-man float fishing operation. And then the man who would become my partner in the future, Rod Patch, he had grown up over in the Roaring Fork Valley and wanted to start a fly shop, and saw an opportunity over here on the Arkansas River. Really didn't have a fly shop, didn't have a developed sort of fishing infrastructure over here. And so he made the move, opened a shop in Salida. We got to know each other over a couple of years, and ended up combining my float fishing with his wade fishing guide service that he created, and formed ArkAnglers. And then together we opened the shop in Buena Vista. For a while we had a shop in Pueblo down at the tailwater. So we've been partners now for going on 24 years, I think. And
nice.
It's been an awesome adventure. And along the way, we've been able to provide just really meaningful employment to a great crew of fishing guides. We've got about, 18 guides that work with us, some of whom go back to, I've got a couple that started with me in 1995, still with me. And
no kidding.
It's been a really cool life and business, and just sort of collaborative working group that our growth of our business coincided with this fishery really coming into focus. And now look at it, most popular fishery in the state, longest stretch of gold medal water. We've done a lot of background work to help get there with a lot of partners, but it's been just a really cool ride.
That's great. And I did have a chance to meet some of your guides, stopping in the shop in Buena Vista a couple of times. I ended up meeting Stuart, I think, who's your alpine lake expert. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. And Stuart we weren't prying it out of him. He volunteered when we heard we were trying to find a lake, and he suggested a couple, and man, they really, they were fantastic. We went to one in particular and caught a bunch of really nice cutthroat. I mean, we're talking 15, 16-inch fatties, really big things you can hardly get your hands around at 12,000 feet. So I think your guys are doing a great job, really set us up well for success.
I don't think there's anybody who knows more about high lake fishing in Colorado than Stuart Andrews, truly.
Oh my gosh.
He is a master, and he's a great communicator and teacher. But, you mentioned just coming in the shop and that experience that you had with people sort of spontaneously providing you with guidance and information. Our philosophy has always been that our number one product needs to be timely, accurate, reliable information. And so we spend a lot of time trying to keep our website updated with our fishing reports, putting stuff on social media. We have a newsletter that folks subscribe to. And we have just always felt that if we focus on really good information and help people have a successful experience here, they'll be back, and everything else from the business standpoint will fall into place just because they're having a great experience here. And I think that's really been borne out over the last 24 years.
Yeah. Boy, I really felt that when I was in there, 100%. I can't wait to come back next year and bring 10 of my buddies. So maybe we'll be smart this time and book some float trips, which is what I wish I was doing. Even though we were doing great rock hopping along the edge, I was watching some of those rafters going by and thinking, yeah, I'd like to be in a float boat right now, casting into the bank. That'd be really nice.
Well, the other thing that is really kind of different about float fishing that people don't always maybe consider, but if you got a buddy or a family member that you want to spend some quality time with, when you go wade fishing, unless you're really trying to instruct them or something, you're going to spread out a bit and do your thing. Exactly. And then you'll intersect now and then. And it's a great day. When you're float fishing, it's you and your partner and the guide are all within a 12 to 14 foot boat, so you can converse the entire day, and you're sharing the experience of every fish and every missed fish or every tangle or whatever happened.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of really great conversation that goes on when people are in the moment, like you are when you're fishing, you're focused, and it kind of loosens up your mind and your mouth. And it's just wonderful conversations and sometimes some real breakthrough moments for people because there's that social dynamic included with the fishing in that setting.
Yeah. Can you give an example? Can you think of a story when one of your clients maybe had a breakthrough moment? Anything come to mind there?
I have had people have realizations between each other, maybe long-standing hurts or rough situations from the past come to light and get resolved. And I'm not going to give you the details because honestly, They're really personal to the people involved, but some really heavy stuff, right? Involving, divorces or sort of prodigal children or deaths in the family or people that were kind of lost to addiction, all these things. I mean, it's a very humbling and humanizing experience to be a float guide and to get to know people over time to where they're comfortable talking. And people share things with me that, again, I won't repeat, but are just profound. And it really, I think, hits home and reminds me that we all have our struggles in life. Like Robin Williams said, I think, everyone you meet is fighting a battle that you can't see or that you know nothing about. We all have these things going on, these demons. And, the river, if I can get a little esoteric here, but the river really has a tremendous capacity to carry off people's sorrow. I mean, it's a physical thing, and especially when you're standing in it. I can't tell you how many people over the years have come into the fly shop and told me, I came to the Arkansas River in the dead of winter or in the winter of my soul, and you guys gave me the advice or the information I needed, and I went out to the river and I had a good day, and that day saved my life.
Wow.
My despair was overwhelming. And so there's a sad element to that, but there's also an incredibly powerful piece to it, which is that people really need what they get from the river and from fishing. It's not just a diversion or entertainment. It is a profound spiritual experience. When we went through the recession in 2008, I remember people writing to me. There was one guy wrote to me and he said, I'm not going to be able to go on any guided trips this year. And I just want you to know it's not anything you guys did, but I lost my job, and I can't pay for guided trips. And I said, oh my gosh, that's terrible. If we can help you in any way, please let me know. And, I hope that you can still find your way back to the river, because I know it's good for you. And he responded, he goes, hey man, a guy can't look for work 24/7. I've been spending more time fishing than I ever have in my life. And it's what's getting me through all of this. So,
Yeah.
I don't want to overstate it, but there are times where I just kind of step back and go, this isn't just about fishing, and it's not
Right.
just about business. There is a real kind of spiritual calling here and a responsibility to the people that we have introduced to this sport or to this fishery. We have to be there for them. We got to be open when we say we're going to be open. We got to have the stuff they need, because we don't know what they're bringing to the table. There's a lot riding on each day. And so we try to sort of treat our interactions with everybody with that sort of background, that this is could very well be more important than it seems.
Yeah, that's really neat. But it's a great way to look at fly fishing and guiding in general. And to think that you're sitting in the middle of the boat, rowing away, and you're part of these conversations.
Oh yeah. I mean, sometimes you're what helps with make the breakthrough happen. Sometimes you just kind of keep quiet and they forget you're there, honestly. But I think the rhythm of fishing and the rhythm of the rowing and the rhythm of the water itself just kind of loosens something up in people, and just really had some great days out there, some of the best days of my life.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the ability just to reflect, it's lost in our always on, speeded up world. Everyone's got their phones with them, and social media and work, and you get out on a river and you kind of put all that stuff down, and you just focus in.
We're fortunate. There's a number of segments of the Arkansas where the cell service non-existent.
Right.
So
right.
I consider
Exactly.
that an asset, not a liability.
There was on my last trip, one of the guys that came with us, and Steve, if you're listening, I love you, brother. He was checking his email every chance he got, and it took everything I had to not say, dude, we just put that away. I mean, it doesn't bother me, but I think you're going to enjoy yourself more if you're not thinking about work all the time, and
Absolutely.
Finally we got into some areas, like that day we did the High Mountain Lake, no cell phone service, and he had a great time, and I don't know, we'll see.
That's good.
Okay. So Greg, shifting gears here. So on your website, you've got a really great article called How to Approach Fishing the Arkansas River. And I'd call this a must read for any angler coming out to fish. And, you talk about how most anglers come into the shop and they're kind of asking the wrong questions. They're asking things like, hey man, what are they hitting on? Or where should I be fishing? And the article goes on to really say, what you should be asking is how should I fish? Or what type of water should I be looking for? And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about those concepts.
Yeah. I mean, I think when people come into a fly shop, they often they come with a lot of preconceptions, either based on their past experience or what they've heard. And they're kind of looking for just this one missing puzzle piece, this silver bullet that will sort of make it all happen for them. And this isn't that kind of fishery. I don't know if anywhere is, but this definitely isn't that kind of fishery, in that, when you sit in a fly shop, particularly in the afternoon, into late in the day, when people start coming back from guided trips or being out on their own, and if it's a good day, when the fish are really actively feeding and whatever dynamics are at work are happening, everybody comes in and they think they know the answer. Right. So one guy would be like, oh man, size 16 green copper John. It's the fly. Right. And then the next guy comes in. Right. And he's like, oh, size 12 hare's ear, killer. Right. And it just goes on. And you're sitting there in the shop. Right. You're not actually out there, but you're taking in all these anecdotal stories, and you're like, okay, I get it. It actually has nothing to do with the fly at all. They were getting the fly in front of actively feeding fish who were not fixated on any one thing, but were just, because of maybe what they'd been through over the last 24 hours, they were really hungry. There was food available, and they were being opportunistic. And it becomes, our questions tend to be like, yeah, okay, the green copper john, that's good. Okay, but what kind of water? Make them think. What was the experience of catching all these fish? What were the other common threads, the commonalities? Because it's really much more about knowing what the fish behavior is, and trying to figure out sort of what are the unifying positive dynamics that are at work on that day or that hour, that stretch of the river that were making it happen. And our job is to try to figure that out, because the next guy's going to come in and he's going to ask what the silver bullet is. And we're going to say, well, here's what you need to do. You need to approach the river in this way. A lot of people, when they come to the river, and that, I mean that generically, any river, they're so excited to finally be there, that they throw on their waders, they grab their bag, they rig with what they believe is going to work or what worked yesterday, run down the bank and just go plunging out there and start fishing. And the more time you spend on any given body of water, the more you're going to learn about it. But it's also more and more probably relevant to take a little time. We always say 5 minutes of observation is worth an hour of fishing. If you can calm yourself down.
Love that.
Try to get a high point, a vantage where you can sort of just watch and pay attention for a little bit before you jump in there. There's often a lot of clues as to what you can expect. If you really start looking into the water and trying to locate fish and then identify kind of what their behavior is signaling about what they're up to. We always want to be watching the weather, both from what happened yesterday or last night and kind of what's coming in the forecast. We think about what the moon was doing last night. I love to watch the birds, the swallows, to me, and they're only here really in the late spring to early fall. They're migratory, but the swallows, I call them the feathered trout. They feed on the same hatches as the fish, and they're a lot more visible. And when they start getting active, something's going on. There's certain birds you can listen for. You hear I just can't imitate them, but I know their feeding song, so to speak. It's really interesting. You can tell when something's about to happen. But so often people sort of don't take the time to kind of really get that field view, overall sense of the situation, or to sort of analyze it in that context when they are having successful fishing, which is unfortunate, because then, the whole day boils down to that green copper john, as opposed to, well, what was really going on there that made this day a good day? And, your last trip was so. So we really try to, this is a very dynamic freestone. It's not a tailwater. The water temperatures change all the time. The clarity of the water changes all the time. The flow changes all the time. And which bugs are active changes all the time. So there's a lot to sort of grapple with. You don't have to get it all right to be successful, not at all. But the more you're able to kind of identify some of these variables and think about how they're playing into the whole experience, the more you start to sometimes just develop more of an intuitive feel for where you should be focusing or how you should be approaching things.
And so on the Arkansas, there could be a range of things that are working versus some of the streams where, okay, I've got to have a size 16 sulfur. I'm just not going to do well. But here, a range of things could work.
Exactly. And with brown trout in that setting, it's really more getting something plausible with a good drift in the right water at that moment where the fish are kind of hanging, whether it's up on the edge or a step or two down off the shoreline or out along a big seam line. Getting those things in place is a lot more important than whether you got a size 18 or a size 20 parachute Adams. It's much more about the presentation, your drift, and being in the right water where fish are most active.
Yeah, gotcha. You said a minute ago bird feeding songs is one of your clues. And that's actually a new one. I've not heard that one before, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, yeah, and I'm no ornithologist or anything, but there, just from all the years, especially in the spring, there are certain bird songs that I hear that just, it's like they always portend something happening in the aquatic entomology that is going to affect the bird's life. That's what they're talking about it. But it is also kind of like speaking for the fish too, because the fish are having a similar experience beneath the surface. And it's just one of these things, you're just around it enough. It's hard to articulate to somebody else, but it is a very real clue. And sometimes it's very objective, it's like, oh, glad to hear that. Other times it's kind of just more this instinctual feeling that you have, and you may not even tie it back to that bird song, but that's just being out there many years, and having the same thing happen over and over.
It's knowing your fishery. So maybe in the back of your mind, you hear this bird song. Are you even conscious of it, or you just kind of start thinking, man, it's going to happen soon? And
sometimes I'm conscious of it. Sometimes I'm not, honestly. Yeah. And I don't want to sound like some kind of fish whisperer, because I am not, believe me. But it is, there's a lot going on. It's not just an equation about fish and bugs. It's a whole ecosystem out there. And so it's kind of cool to step back and perceive it that way and take into account the activities of birds in particular and how they're interacting.
Love it. Okay, now you also mentioned the moon. Are you talking about moon phases? Or are you talking about cloud cover, or a little bit of both?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's the phases for sure, right? Like we have nights that are really dark, and we have nights that are really bright. And I think, honestly, all things being equal, we tend not to do as well the morning after a really bright night than after a dark night. And, and you see that with hunting too, right? Like,
sure,
big game is going to be a lot more active on a full moon night and probably be heading to their beds earlier in the morning than those pitch black new moon nights.
Sure. So what is the ideal situation with the moon then? What do you like for best fishing?
Oh, I just try to, we have to fish when we have to fish, right? We're guides. We go, and you got to adapt to it. And so I wouldn't want to say, oh, plan your vacation around the moon cycle, because that's just one element among many that you might consider. But yeah, I don't know. It does seem to me that around that full moon time, particularly in the morning, you've got fish that often have been more active during the night, and brown trout, major predator type fish, But that's not to say they only feed at night. Not at all. It'll just be a little later in the day often that maybe they're more active. And of course, if there's food available, that's going to be the number one driver. This is a sort of a background element.
Right. Well, in a couple minutes here, could you give us, kind of the major hatches that anglers should be aware of to kind of walk us through the seasons on the Ark?
You bet. And so I'm going to do this from the perspective of Salida, right, which is kind of at the midpoint of this 100 miles.
Sure.
Both in terms of distance, but also in terms of elevation, right? And we talked earlier in the show, I think, about how, water temperatures warm up earlier in the spring and stay warm later in the fall down in Bighorn Sheep Canyon than they do up in Hayden Meadows near Leadville, right? Because lower elevation is just warmer for longer in the year. So with Salida as sort of a point of reference, what we see through the winter, which would be, let's say, November through February, is the primary food supply that's really consistent are midges. And we have midge hatches every afternoon, late morning to afternoon. The fish mostly feed on midge larvae, not so much on the adults. And I think that's just because it's such a turbulent river that it's hard for fish to, unless they're in a real foamy eddy, it's hard for them to get a lot of adults. So it's subsurface. And then along with that, these are opportunistic brown trout too. So they will grub a case caddis off the rocks in the winter. There are, the random mayfly or stonefly nymph that comes tumbling down. So they're up for anything. So we often will fish a stonefly nymph, golden stonefly nymph, and say a zebra midge in the winter. And you're sort of appealing to what they're actually eating and then what they'd love to eat given the opportunity. And then as we move into February, you get more emphasis on golden stoneflies because that's a period when they go through a molt, so to speak. They shed their exoskeleton so they can continue to grow. And when they do that, they're often more vulnerable to getting tumbled along by the current. And they're very bright. They're like a snake that's just shed its skin. Very, very colorful, very golden, more visible to the fish. And so we see fish at that time, particularly in the mornings, they'll key onto these golden stoneflies that are going through this part of their life cycle.
Yeah, cool.
Moving into March, we get some great free-living caddis larval drifts. So these are caddis that aren't in a case. They just live more freely. They kind of have a little web, spider web type filament that attaches them to sticks and rocks and things. And they will cut loose in mass and drift and then reattach themselves downstream. Just a population dynamic, another morning type of activity that we often associate in early March. And I mentioned these subsurface things. They're hard to see happening, but you can see the fish activity, because before we get to mid-March or so, most fish are in winter water. They're in slower, deeper holes for the winter. And when these subsurface events are happening, you see fish moving more up into riffly water. You can see them kind of flashing and working. You can tell they're feeding up in there. So it starts to pick up speed as you move into the later spring. About the middle of March is when we have our first really major pulse of food, which is our blue-wing olive mayfly hatches get started. We call it the St. Patrick's Day hatch, and that runs from mid-March into early May. But that's a real consistent, every afternoon you have drifting nymphs. If it's cloudy and cool, you're going to get a good hatch. If it's bright and warm, probably not much of a hatch. The fish don't care. They're more focused on the drifting nymphs, honestly, than they are the adults. And same thing, you just get fish moving into all these seam lines, up into riffles, and just really actively feeding 1 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We have a Brachycentrus caddis fly hatch, a Mother's Day caddis that is a cased caddis that, again, in Salida, this is a water temperature driven hatch. So in Salida, we normally see these bugs hatching around the 1st of May, but the hatch really starts down in Canyon City below the Royal Gorge, lower elevation, around the middle of April. And then as water temperatures increase upstream, you find the hatch further and further upstream, such that it typically continues up to Buena Vista around May 10th or so. So it's this kind of wave moving upstream of hatch and caddisflies, and that's a tremendous pulse of food. I mean, you get blanket hatches on the river at times. It can be hard to fish. You get so many bugs.
Right.
And then, a few other odds and ends that happen in the spring. Then you have high water because some of our tributaries have dams on them. Most of them don't. So runoff is largely a natural hydrological phenomenon. And then as you get into summer, of course, you have all the terrestrials, the hoppers, the beetles, the ants that are kind of always around and a great part of the mix. But we see pale morning duns through the summer, typically kind of in the afternoons, pretty good size, little cream-colored mayflies. We have yellow Sally stoneflies hatching in late June through mid-July. We have active golden stoneflies throughout the summer. We have about 50 species of caddis in this river, so there's always some kind of caddis that's active. We have increasing numbers of red quills also. So a real mix of stones, caddis, mayflies. The midges continue uninterrupted, and then all the terrestrials. And then sometimes when there's sort of a pause in the bug action, you don't want to forget about all those brown trout fry that are out there. So streamer fishing can be really good too, and especially brown trout. They're aggressive on the streamers. And then as you move into early fall, the blue-wing olives get going again in September, sort of mid-September or so. and we get a whole nother round of that till mid-October or so. And then you're back to the midges. So it's a great year. There's a lot here, and honestly, good dry fly fishing is available from mid-March to mid-October.
These browns are looking up.
Yep.
Yeah, that's quite a smorgasbord of bugs to key in on. Give us, if you could, maybe just some of your favorite patterns as you kind of go through the years, like size, color, and patterns. What do you think?
Well, and I just, disclaimer, I am not the great innovator in ArkAnglers. People like Stuart Andrews, who I mentioned earlier, are highlight specialists. There's some guys that really are on the cutting edge and doing a lot of tying and just really exploring of patterns from all over the West. But, for me, I go back to a lot of the old favorites. So in those winter months, I'm often fishing either a good-sized hare's ear and a black and silver zebra midge, or like a black Pat's rubber leg and a zebra midge, or in an epoxy back stone in a real golden color. That's my winter go-to rig. Big chunk of meat and a little midge larva.
How small are you going on like hare's ear and those zebra midges?
Well, the hare's ear is probably more like a 12 or 14, and then the zebra midge is probably a 20.
Oh, real small. Okay, there you go.
The blue wing olives, those are all kind of 18 to 20. And on top, it's hard to beat the good old parachute Adams, honestly. But the brook sprout Baetis, with the little foam dot underneath the parachute tied hackle, that's a really good kind of emerger / adult pattern that we use a lot. Subsurface, I love bar emergers. That's a great fly. The RS2 is great. The Charlie Craven's Juju Baetis, really good one. And again, 18s, 20s on these. For the caddis hatch, we fish a whole spectrum of sort of beadhead caddis pupa. They all have that sort of soft hackle, traditional wet fly look, but then a lot of different kinds of sparkle and bubble and stuff to them. But I tend to go pretty drab on that, kind of an olive dubbed soft hackle, kind of traditional wet fly look. And then for the dry, honestly, so we had a fellow, some people may recognize this name, Don Pewterbaugh, who was, really, really well-known fly tyer from starting back in the 60s, and just passed away this year. I think he was 94 years old, but he guided with us many years, and he created this black foam caddis that is specifically tied for the Arkansas, and it's just tough to beat that fly. Honestly, I fish it all the time in a 16. In the evenings, when you've got egg-laying females coming out to oviposit into the river, often go a little bigger and fatter. So I might go up to a 14, more like a peacock caddis, something like that. It's got just a bigger profile to it.
I get you.
On the PMDs, I love the bar emerger PMD pattern. These are probably a 16 on the surface. I love the good old light Cahill. I think that's awesome PMD adult, and I keep going back to that. Let's see, on the we fish, honestly, we do a lot of what I would call sort of impressionistic big dries in the summertime. So, your chubby Chernobyls, your Amy's ants, your parachute Madam X's, things like that. That could be a hopper, could be a stonefly. They're just buggy. They're big. They're a great indicator for either a beadhead dropper or maybe a small dry, like an ant or something behind it. And so often what we're throwing isn't what's on the water necessarily in the summer. Although when that yellow Sally hatch is happening, that's another one we key into. It's a number of different yellow Sally adults. And then the red quills, the red copper johns, the red 2-bit hooker, another Charlie Craven pattern from out here in Colorado.
Sure.
Great for the nymphs. And honestly, the traditional red quill dry, quill body, traditional tie is a good imitation of that bug. Really stand by it. So that's kind of give you an idea. I mean, we sell hundreds of different patterns, but there's probably really about 25 that I mostly fish through the year. You kind of get confident in something and you stick with it.
Stick with it. Yeah, that's a great rundown, Greg. Real quick, what could you tell people about alpine lakes? What advice could you give folks who are heading up into the high country?
Well, my number one bit of advice would be to talk to Stuart Andrews.
Yeah, right.
Honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that one.
I think a couple things to know. One is that probably more than anything, water temperature is really important in the high lakes. And so, you often get to a high lake and you're like, oh my gosh, look at those huge cutthroats. And they're cruising lazily along near the surface, along the shoreline, and you'll lay something in front of them and you'll see them sort of look at it and keep going. The water's not warm enough yet. Their metabolism isn't kicking in. And until that happens, you're going to have a really hard time getting them to eat. So it's important that you understand that.
Too early in the season, you're saying?
Too early in the day. Yeah. You rush to get up there and they're just not ready yet. Once they're ready, they'll often eat quite a mix of stuff. I think that's a really huge factor. The other thing to be aware of is up in that high country on a warm summer day, all that dark timber on the slopes below a high lake, as that warms up, it creates its own lift, right? The warm air starts rising out of the forest, and it can be pretty powerful. And that rising air sucks all kinds of terrestrials out of the trees and carries them up. And then as the air mass moves over this cold body of water, it cools the air, and the air has less capacity to carry a load. And you've probably seen it. You look out over a calm lake in the afternoon up high, and it's got little teeny dimples all over it, as if it were raining or something, starting to sprinkle, and it's a clear sky. Well, that's this adiabatic cooling of the risen air mass, and all this stuff falling out of it. A lot of it's going to be little, bits of bark and needles and things like that. But combined in all that is all kinds of little ants and beetles and aphids and things like that. And so we fish a lot of little teeny terrestrial patterns, like the ants, like the like the irresistible, in a 18 20, just buggy little stuff, and fish feed real opportunistically among that. So we'll often use one of these kind of impressionistic larger attractor drives that I mentioned, and then trail these little terrestrial guys behind there. And that's a lot of what fish eat. If you check a fish's stomach contents in a high mountain lake, you're often going to find a real mix, and particularly late in the day. And a lot of these kind of hard, crunchy little beetle and ant exoskeletons mixed in there. Yeah, that's where that comes from.
And where are the feeding fish in a lake? Because they're not necessarily in the deepest parts, right?
Right. I mean, that's going to, I guess, depend a lot on what's going on. But yeah, fish in the deepest parts really aren't accessible to most people, even if you had a float tube or something, just getting down that deep. So we do a lot more sight fishing. In fact, that's a lot of what you do on these high lakes, particularly if it's not windy at all and you can really see in. We look for the fish, and we look for the shadows that the fish cause. Sometimes it's easier to see a big cutthroat shadow on the bottom than it is to see the fish itself. And then, you're watching their trajectory, and you're trying to get it out ahead of where they're going and let them come to it.
That's awesome. Good tips, Greg. Man, this has been a great hour and 20 minutes or so. Thanks for sharing. Great job. And, just in closing, I just got to ask you, what are some of your favorite angler-friendly watering holes, either Salida, Buena Vista, or somewhere in between?
Well, I live down in Salida, so I tend to hit the watering holes that I can walk home from, I guess you could say. There's a brewery out on the highway that Soulcraft, it's called, that is right nearby where I live. So I wander over there now and then. Downtown, we've got our mayor, P.T. Woods, has a distillery. He makes his own whiskey, gin, and vodka. It's called Woods High Mountain Distillery. That's a that's a great spot to pop in. A lot of character there. We've got right next door to him is a really cool tap house where they've got just all kinds of beers and you serve yourself. That's a great spot. There's out in Poncha Springs, we've got Elevation Brewery, and people may have heard of First Cast Pale Ale. It's got a fly fisherman on the can. It has a wide following, at least in this part of the country. And then up in Buena Vista, we've got Eddie Line Brewing. So our two main brewers are, sort of take their namesake from river themes and are very much sort of a part of the whole fishing and boating culture here on the Arkansas River.
Good. That's a good rundown. Okay, folks. So there you have it. Lots of reasons to come to the Arkansas River Valley and Buena Vista, Salida, even Leadville is a pretty cool old town. We spent some time up there. Greg, how can people get in touch with you and maybe book a trip?
So our website is ArkAnglers.com, and that's ARK, anglers.com. You can email us from the site. You can also, we've got fishing reports for the lower, middle, and upper basin. So a lot of information there. You can call us at 719-539-4223, or you can email to info@arkanglers.com. And we
perfect.
try to respond within 24 hours to all the emails we get. And so we'll get back to you. And if you're in the area, we have shops on Highway 50 in Salida and Highway 24 in Buena Vista. Very easy to find. And again, I want to emphasize our number one product is information. You should not feel like, oh, I don't want to go in the shop unless I'm going to buy something. We're here for your success. And please don't hesitate to come in and ask the questions. We've got maps. We'll help you find a place to go.
Yeah. You know what? I can vouch for that because I was asking a lot of questions, as I always do, and your guy was very patient with me. And so we backed up the line just a little bit at the counter, but he was very patient. So
I love it.
Thanks for being on the show, Greg. Great job.
You bet, Steve. Great questions. And hope we see you out here again sometime.
You bet. Hey, wish you extraordinary success in everything you're doing. And folks, thank you for listening. We'll be sure to post all this info on the Destination Angler website. And, if you like the show, tag your buddy, let other folks know about the show. You can always DM me or email me with comments and suggestions at shag50@gmail.com. As always, our music is by our Brothers Fountain, a band out of Fort Collins, Colorado. Hope you joined the show, and we will see you again soon. Tight lines, folks.
Well, I'll go from the land to the shining sea. But I know there's more to life than what the eye can see.